Hello 108 students, Mr. McHugh here with you to kick off section 8.7, page 1, and we are going to deal with complex numbers. Now, we're going to enter a new realm of mathematics, but before we go crazy with all this, we got to start off with something. And we start beginning of this chapter, and we did what happens if you take the square root of a negative number. So let's just go back and ask ourselves, what can we do with the square root of negative 9? Now, you know, with our rules of radical factoring, or multiplication, you can pull out negative 1 times a positive 9, and so take the square root of both of them and say, well, at least the square root of 9 is 3, but we're still stuck with this square root of negative 1. And it turns out we cannot come up with any number multiplied by itself that will equal negative 1. Remember the basic definition of square roots. Again, if you take a positive 1 times a positive 1, you get positive 1. If I take negative times negative, you still get a positive 1. What do you have to use? You got to use the combination of a positive and a negative to produce a negative, which is not allowed as far as definition of radicals. So we are stuck with this, and mathematicians went bananas. They said this doesn't exist. You can't take the square root of a negative number. And after a while, and I think it took them a while, finally somebody one day had this ah moment. And what the ah moment was this: it's like the square root of negative 1 does not exist in the real world. It's like it's imaginary. And when they said that, mathematicians invented the imaginary number, and all they did was they said, we are going to take the letter I, and instead of it being a variable that can be used for any algebra problem, we are going to assign it the specific definition, and I is going to be used to represent the square root of negative 1 so we can deal with it. Okay, so there you go. Imaginary number is the square root of negative 1 is equal to I. And mathematicians had this realization, and they said, well, look at this. If we take the square root of negative 1 and multiply it by itself, or take the square root of negative 1 and square it, what happens? You know that squaring undoes the square root, and the radical drops down, so therefore it equals negative 1. And you're saying, okay. And then they said, well, square root of negative 1 is I times I equals what class? I squared. So this is the definition you want to memorize. I squared equals negative 1. Okay, what this does for you is it allows you to go from imaginary. We start doing these problems. Oops, I lost my, where am I? Whenever we start working on these problems from imaginary and real numbers, this is the way to translate or to transform between imaginary I squared to the real numbers, to the real world. So if you just have an I, you're stuck in imaginary, but whenever you get an I times an I, which is I squared, you replace it with negative 1. Okay, so that's the big concept we're going to work with here. So go back to our problem again, the square root of negative 9. Now what you can do is whenever you see the square root of a negative number, put the I in there, and then take the square root of the positive 9, and you write 3. And you're on your way. Okay, and the other protocol is when you've got just an imaginary number, we like to put the I first, then the number afterwards. Okay, it gets you'll see this as we go along here. Okay, so we got a couple examples to try. Square root of negative 100. Okay, again, now you can see all this extra work, but do you really need to do all that? You're now learning quickly. See the square of a negative number, boom. Sorry. You put the I guess they want the number first, then the variable. That's right. Sorry. I got this backwards. I'm sorry. So you really should write 3 I's your answer here. Sorry about that. And that's what this is easy to remember because we always put the coefficient in front of the variable. Okay, so there's no special rule there. Just remember we work with variables, coefficient or the number in front of the variable. Okay, so square root of negative 1 is I, square root of 100 is 10. Okay, and there you go. Now if they put a negative on the outside, negative on the inside, you got to be careful. You're going to get excuse me, the negative 36 is going to produce the I. This negative is going to come right here, and so you're going to get square root of 36 is 6, so it's negative 6i. Okay. Over here, here's the square root of negative 54. Break it down. 6 times 9. Square root of 9 is 3. The negative produced the I for imaginary, because the square root of negative 1 is I. And square root of 6 we leave alone. So 3I times the square root of 6. Format, put the numbers before the I. Coefficients go before the I. Radicals we leave at the end, by the way, so we don't write the square root of 6I in this case, because you can't tell whether in this notation is the I underneath the radical or not. So we don't do that. We always put the I first, then you put the radical. Okay, now a key concept here we have to cover before we finish up this page. It says warning, when you multiply two negative roots, convert to imaginary first, then multiply. And so the reason why we're doing this, and I'll go with the number example here first. If you saw the square root of negative 4 times the square root of negative 9, you'd say, well, you're multiplying the radicals underneath it, and you'd say negative 4 times negative 9 and say a positive 36. That's not true. Okay, you got to watch it. You can't do that. You've got to break them down first and pull out the I, or pull out the negative square root of 1, which is an I. So it's I times the square root of 4 times I times the square root of 9. Again, that's because of that negative 1. Now I times I produces I squared, and I squared equals what class? That's right, a negative. Okay, and the square root of 36 is 9. Oops, excuse me. Yeah. Square root of 36 is 9 when you multiply them out, so you've got negative 6 is your answer. Now, with that said, you could look at this real quick, and you could come down here and take a shortcut and say negative times a negative is I squared, which is going to be a negative result. 4 times 9 is 36. Square root of 36 is 6, and you got your answer. Okay, hey, I think we've done it here. I've got the letters over here. You can follow this. I think the numbers are more easier to follow here, but you can see the same idea. Pull out the two negative I, pull out the i's because of the negative square roots of 1 produces I squared, which produces the negative, and it's the square root of the two numbers being multiplied. Okay, Mr. McKee, going to check out for now, so I will see you for page 2, and we're going to dig more into this complex numbers. Okay, bye.